The people sent to save his life were actually there to end it. And the only person who knew was a 7-year-old girl in the hallway. She didn't speak Polish, but she understood enough to know the nurses were lying. And she was the only one who could warn the most dangerous man in the city. This is Don Marco Morty. In his world, he makes the rules, but in a hospital bed hooked to machines, he is utterly powerless. The little girl is Sophia, his niece, and what she heard wasn't a medical instruction. It was an order. The question wasn't if they would kill him, but when. And the only thing standing between the Don and his own medicine was a child who shouldn't have understood a word. For 30 years, Don Marco Morty ruled Chicago's underworld not with chaos, but with cold, predictable order. His empire was built on trucking, waste management, and silence. Then, on a rainy Tuesday in October, order shattered. His armored car was T-boned by a garbage truck at the intersection of Grand and Halsted. The police called it a tragic accident. Marco's men knew better. It was in declaration of war. He was rushed to St. Ignatius Medical Center with 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a head wound that left him drifting in and out of consciousness. For the first 48 hours, it was touch and go. The family flooded the waiting room. His consigliere Enzo Rossi, a man with a face like folded leather and eyes that missed nothing, took command. He posted guards on the door, vetted every doctor, and personally tasted Marco's food. The old ways, the safe ways. But the enemy wasn't trying to storm the gates. They were already inside. St. Ignatius wasn't just any hospital. It was a cornerstone of the community, but also, according to federal subpoenas, a node in a sprawling network of medical supply fraud and pharmaceutical diversion. A place where millions in opioids vanished from inventory, and where certain administrators had developed a taste for offshore bonuses. It was a system ripe for coercion. And the Novick family, Polish rivals pushing west from Milwaukee, had a specialty. Not brute force, but bureaucratic suffocation. They didn't shoot you. They got your license revoked, your contracts canceled, your life support pulled by someone in a lab coat. Marco's 7-year-old niece, Sophia, was there because her mother, Marco's sister, was too distraught to leave. Sophia was a quiet child with large, watchful eyes. She spent hours in the family waiting room, coloring, her ears absorbing the tense whispers of soldiers and the beeping of machines. And she understood Polish. Her grandmother, Babcia, who passed the year before, spoke nothing else to her. Those afternoons of asterisk pierogi and fairy tales had given Sophia a child's vocabulary, a music box of simple words and phrases buried in her memory. On the 3rd day, Marco's condition stabilized. The doctor, a nervous man named Riggs, announced they would begin a new intravenous antibiotic to fight a potential infection. Routine, he said. Essential. Enzo nodded, scrutinizing the vial. The order was placed. That afternoon, Sophia, bored, went to get a juice box from the nurse's station. She saw 2 new nurses preparing a medication cart. They were different. They didn't smile at her. They spoke in low, urgent tones, and they spoke in Polish. Sophia froze, juice box forgotten. She caught words, Babcia *S words. Szybko, quick, konik, the end. Najbudzi si *, he won't wake up. And then one phrase, clear as ice, podaj kala ampulk *, give the whole ampule. The lead nurse, a blonde woman with sharp features named Anya, held up a small glass vial. It wasn't the antibiotic. The label was different. She slipped it into her pocket next to the legitimate vial. She then loaded a syringe, drawing liquid from the bottle in her pocket, not the one on the cart. The other nurse, a younger woman, looked terrified, shaking her head. Anya gripped her arm, her whisper turning harsh. Zerab tu, albo twajbrat jest nastepni *. Do it or your brother is next. Sophia backed away, her heart a tiny drum. She didn't understand the plot, the politics, the vials, but she understood threat. She understood that these women in the healing clothes were doing a bad thing to Uncle Marco, the man who always gave her candy, who called her his little shadow. She ran back to the waiting room. Mama, she whispered, tugging on her mother's sleeve. The nurses are bad, they said the end. They have a secret medicine. Her mother, eyes red from crying, shushed her. Not now, Kara asterisk. The doctors are helping him. Sophia tried Enzo. He was on the phone, his back turned, talking about territory and responses. He patted her head absently. Go color, Piccolina. Panic rose in her throat. The adults were too busy with their adult fears to hear her. The cart would be going to Marco's room soon. She had seen the syringe. She knew what asterisk Kala Ampolk meant. All of it. This was the Novik play. Not a street assassination, but a silent, clinical kill inside a fortress of white walls. A death that would be recorded as a tragic reaction to medication, a sudden septic shock, an accident within an accident. Marco's own men, for all their vigilance, were watching for guns and knives, not for the subtle swap of a vial by a trained professional. Sophia made a decision. She slipped past the guard at the corridor entrance, ducking under his elbow as he checked a text. The hallway to Marco's private room seemed a mile long. She could see Anya at the far end, pushing the cart, her steps efficient, her face a mask of calm professionalism. The door to room 414 was slightly ajar. Inside, Marco lay pale against the pillows, monitors painting his vitals in green light. Enzo stood by the window. The scene was set for the final act. Sophia burst into the room, her small frame trembling. All her words vanished. The English, the Polish, all gone. She just ran to the bedside and threw her arms across Marco's chest, a tiny human shield. She looked up at the stunned Don, his eyes fluttering open, and found the only word that mattered. "Nai," she begged, the Polish no tearing from her throat. "Nai beers, don't take it." Anya stopped in the doorway, the cart behind her, her professional smile freezing into a rictus of shock. Enzo turned from the window, his hand moving instinctively under his jacket. Marco's clouded gaze focused on Sophia's terrified face, then lifted to the nurse in the door. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the steady beep of the heart monitor. The syringe, filled with a clear liquid that was definitely not antibiotic, sat gleaming on the cart. The plot was out. It was in the open, and everything was about to explode. For 5 full seconds, no one moved. The only sound was the heart monitor's steady beep, a metronome counting down the silence. Then Enzo moved. He didn't go for the nurse. He stepped between the cart and Marco's bed, his body a wall, his eyes locked on the syringe. "What is in that?" His voice was quiet, flat. It was the tone he used right before someone disappeared. Anya, the nurse, swallowed. Her mask of professionalism was gone, replaced by raw panic. It's the prescribed antibiotic ceftriaxone, as ordered." Her English was perfect, with only a faint trace of an accent. Sophia, still clinging to Marco, shook her head violently. "No, she took it from her pocket. The other bottle is in her pocket," she cried, the words tumbling out in a mix of English and Polish. Marco's hand, weak but deliberate, came to rest on Sophia's head. His eyes, though hazy with painkillers, were sharp. He looked at Enzo and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Enzo didn't touch the syringe. He called out, never taking his eyes off Anya. "Vincenzo, get in here." The guard from the hall entered, his hand inside his jacket. "Take the cart, all of it. The vials, the syringe, everything. Put it in the car. Do not let it out of your sight." Then to Anya, "You, sit." The younger nurse, who had been hovering behind Anya, tried to back away. "I have other patients." Enzo's gaze cut to her. "You sit too." The atmosphere in the room transformed from a medical suite to an interrogation chamber. Marco pressed the call button. When a different nurse's voice crackled through, he spoke, his voice gravelly but firm. "Send Dr. Riggs, now." While they waited, Enzo questioned Sophia gently. "What did you hear, asterisk Piccolina, exactly?" Sophia, emboldened by being believed, recounted the words. "Shibko, quick, konik the end. Nai budsy si asterisk, he won't wake up." She took a shaky breath. Then she said, asterisk podage kala ampolk. "Give the whole bottle." and she told the other nurse, "Do it or your brother is next." The color drained from the younger nurse's face. Anya stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched. Dr. Riggs arrived, flustered. "What's the meaning of this? You can't detain hospital staff." Marco cut him off. "Doctor, you ordered an antibiotic, correct?" "Yes, of course. Ceftriaxone, 1 gram intravenously to prevent opportunistic infection." "Is it standard to administer the entire multi-dose vial in a single syringe?" Riggs blinked, confused. "No, absolutely not. A 1-gram dose is drawn from a larger vial. Administering the entire vial, that would be a massive, potentially lethal overdose. It could cause renal failure, seizures. Who would do that?" All eyes turned to Anya. Enzo said the syringe on that cart was full, to the brim. Riggs went pale. He walked to the cart, now being wheeled out by Vincenzo. He peered at the labeled vial still in the medication bin. This is the correct drug." Then he looked at Anya. "May I see your pockets?" Anya didn't resist. From the deep pocket of her scrubs, Riggs pulled out a second, smaller glass ampule. It had no pharmacy label, just a smudged chemical code handwritten in black ink. Riggs held it up to the light. "This is not hospital stock. I have no idea what this is." The plot was no longer a child's fantasy. It was physical evidence. Enzo took the ampule. "We'll find out." He had a man, a former chemistry professor who now did specialized work for the family, waiting in a lab 2 blocks away. Within the hour, the call came. The ampule contained a concentrated solution of potassium chloride. Injected all at once into an intravenous line, it would cause immediate cardiac arrest. Death would be swift, and on autopsy, it could easily be missed or attributed to a pre-existing heart condition exacerbated by trauma. The perfect hospital hit. Back in the room, with the door locked, Marco confronted the reality. This wasn't just an attack. It was a sophisticated insider operation. The Noviks hadn't just bribed a nurse. They had compromised the hospital's hearing process, its supply chain, its very sanctity. Enzo's interrogation of the younger nurse, Kaja, broke her quickly. She was a recent immigrant. Her brother was in debt to Novaclink loan sharks back in Greenpoint. Anya had approached her, promised her brother's debt would vanish if she helped. She was to be the witness, to confirm the accidental overdose was a simple medical error. Anya was the operator. But Anya herself was a harder nut. She was a Polish national with an impeccable nursing record, hired through a new agency the hospital had started using 6 months prior for specialized international staff. She said nothing, invoking her right to a lawyer. It didn't matter. Enzo's people were already tearing apart her life. They found the offshore account, the deposits from a shell company that traced back to a Novik-held property in Cicero. They found the apartment paid for in cash. They found the photo of her mother in Rocklo, living in a suddenly upgraded house. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. The Noviks hadn't just planted one assassin. They had created a pipeline. St. Ignatius, with its financial troubles and lax oversight, was the perfect beachhead. Marco, propped up on his pillows, listened to Enzo's report. The pain from his injuries was nothing compared to the cold fury settling in his gut. They had tried to murder him in his sleep. They had used a child's sanctuary, a place of healing, as their killing floor, and they had terrified his Sophia. "Where is Kaja now?" Marco asked. "In the basement, frightened but cooperative." "Keep her that way, she may be useful." Marco's mind was working, pushing through the fog of medication. "The other one, Anya, she is a soldier. She will not talk, but she is a message." "A message?" "They are not hiding, they are showing me their reach. Into my city, into my hospital. They are saying my walls are made of paper." Marco coughed, a wet, painful sound. "We must show them their mistake was not the plan, it was the target." Enzo understood. This was no longer just about defense, it was about demonstration. The first move was internal. Marco ordered a purge of all staff at St. Ignatius who had been hired through the new agency. Administrators were leaned on, quietly. Resignations were accepted. The head of nursing, who had championed the international program, took an unexpected early retirement. The message to the Novik infiltrators was clear: you are seen, and you are removed. The second move was a statement. 2 days later, the body of a Novik lieutenant was found in a dumpster behind a pharmacy in Novik territory. There were no bullet wounds, no signs of struggle. The coroner would later list the cause as acute anaphylactic shock, a severe allergic reaction. Rumor whispered that the man had been administered a dose of something he was terribly allergic to, and his epinephrine pen had been just out of reach. A clinical death, a mirror. The war had shifted from the streets to the shadows of institutions, a battle fought with paperwork, poisons, and psychological terror. But Marco knew this was only the first skirmish. The Noviks had revealed their new tactic, but not their full strength. Enzo's deep dive into the hospital's records revealed something more disturbing. The financial irregularities weren't just Novik bribes. There was a pattern of inflated invoices, phantom medical supply companies, and massive overbilling to Medicaid that predated the Novik infiltration by years. St. Ignatius wasn't just compromised. It was a golden goose being plucked by multiple hands. And one name kept appearing on the approval forms for the most fraudulent companies: the hospital's chief financial officer, Arthur Finch, a man with no known connection to the Noviks, a man who lived in the suburbs, played golf, and sat on the hospital's charity board. When Enzo dug into Finch, he found a different kind of vulnerability: gambling debts, large ones, owed not to a Novik bookie but to an independent offshore sports operation. Marco saw the connection. The Noviks hadn't created the corruption at St. Ignatius. They had simply found it, like rats finding a crack in a granary wall, and slithered in to take their share. They had leveraged Finch's debts to get their nurses placed, to move freely. The hospital was a kingdom of corruption, and the Noviks were just the latest, most violent tenants. This changed everything. The enemy wasn't just a rival family, it was the rot itself, and Marco was lying at its epicenter. His recovery was slow. The pain was constant. Sophia refused to leave his side, sleeping on a cot next to his bed. She had nightmares, waking up crying about nurses with syringes. Her simple act of bravery had pulled her into a world of adult nightmares. Marco, for the first time in his life, felt the crushing weight of guilt mixed with his rage. He had brought this to her doorstep. Enzo, working around the clock, brought him another piece of the puzzle: the garbage truck that had hit Marco's car. Its maintenance logs had been signed off by a shop that was a front for Novik money laundering. The driver had vanished. The accident was the opening gambit, designed to deliver Marco to their chosen battlefield, the hospital. It was a full-spectrum attack: physical, psychological, and now institutional. They weren't trying to win a street fight. They were trying to dismantle Marco's legend, to prove he was vulnerable everywhere, even in a place that should have been neutral ground. 1 week after Sophia's warning, Marco was finally deemed stable enough for discharge. Plans were made to move him to a private, secure convalescence home the family owned on the North Shore. It was supposed to be secret. Only Enzo, Marco's sister, and 2 trusted drivers knew the route and timing. The morning of the move, as a nurse came in to disconnect Marco's final IV line, Sophia was watching from her cot. The nurse was new, another face from the regular staff. She was friendly, chatting with Marco as she worked. But as she reached for the catheter in Marco's hand, Sophia saw it: a flicker of recognition, a subtle shift in posture. The nurse's eyes darted to the cardiac monitor for a second too long, not checking his vitals but timing something. And then Sophia heard it under the nurse's breath, a muttered phrase in Polish as she fumbled with the tape: "Juz prawi asterisk," almost there. Sophia froze, her blood turning cold. It was a different voice, a different face, but the language was the same. The war wasn't over because they caught Anya. The hospital wasn't safe because they fired some staff. The Noviks hadn't put all their eggs in one basket. They had planted a garden. As the nurse smiled and told Marco he was all set, preparing to remove the direct access to his bloodstream, Sophia realized the horrifying truth. They weren't just in the hospital. They were the hospital. And the next attempt wasn't coming in a dramatic syringe showdown. It was happening right now, quietly in the routine, trusted act of disconnecting a patient. Sophia didn't scream. She didn't point. She just locked eyes with her uncle, her small face a mask of pure terror, and gave the tiniest, most urgent shake of her head. Marco, reading her like a code he'd known all his life, went still. The nurse's fingers were on the catheter port, ready to flush the line before removal. A routine flush with saline, or with something else. "Stop," Marco said, the word quiet but absolute. The nurse, a middle-aged woman named Brenda according to her badge, froze. "Mr. Morty, is there pain?" "Enzo," Marco said, his eyes never leaving Brenda's hands. "Check the flush syringe." Brenda's smile became strained. "It's just saline to clear the line, standard procedure." But she didn't hand it over. She held it just a little too tightly. Enzo was already moving. He didn't grab for it. He simply placed his large, scarred hand over hers on the syringe. "Let's see it." A flicker of something dark passed behind Brenda's eyes. Not fear of a mobster, but the panic of a mission compromised. She released the syringe. Enzo examined it. It looked normal. He uncapped the needle and expelled a single drop onto the back of his hand, then touched it to the tip of his tongue. A old, dangerous test. His face hardened. Not saline, bitter, metallic. He looked at Marco. Could be anything, digitalis maybe, enough to send a damaged heart into arrest during transport. Brenda backed up a step. "That's impossible, it's from a sealed." Enzo didn't let her finish. He had her against the wall, his forearm across her throat in one fluid motion. A quick search of her pockets yielded not another ampule, but a preloaded, concealable pen injector, the kind used for severe allergies. It was labeled epinephrine, but the liquid inside was clear, not the usual yellow of adrenaline. A second option, a backup kill. The plot was no longer a single sniper. It was a minefield. The Noviks had created layers. Anya with her potassium chloride was the obvious hammer. Brenda, with her disguised pen and tainted flush, was the subtle knife, the fail-safe. How many more were there? In the kitchen, in the pharmacy, driving the ambulance. Marco made a decision. He was not going to the North Shore. He was not moving. The enemy had mapped his escape and planted threats along the route. The only territory he could control was this room, right now. He ordered a lockdown. Not a hospital lockdown, but a Morty lockdown. His men swept in, 12 of them displacing hospital security. They took control of the entire fourth-floor wing. No one entered or left without Enzo's direct approval. Food was brought from a trusted restaurant and tested. All medication was stopped. Marco would heal on his own, or not at all. From his fortified room, Marco waged a new kind of war. He used Kasia, the broken nurse, as a probe. Under protection, she was made to reach out to her Novik handler, claiming she was scared and needed extraction. The handler took the bait, arranging a meeting in a hospital staff parking garage. Enzo's men were waiting. They didn't take the handler, they followed him. He led them not to a Novik social club, but to a modest office building downtown, housing a medical billing consultancy. The consultancy was a shell. Its real purpose was to manage the financial side of the hospital corruption, siphoning funds through Arthur Finch, the CFO. The Novik handler was not a tough guy. He was an accountant named Leo. When brought to Marco's room, Leo, faced with the reality of his situation, talked faster than an auctioneer. He revealed the full structure. The Noviks hadn't invented the scheme. They had muscled in on it. The corruption at St. Ignatius was a pre-existing condition, a lucrative fraud run by a consortium of administrators and outside contractors. The Noviks, expanding their operations, had discovered it, threatened the players, and demanded a cut. In return, they offered enforcement services. They used the hospital's own compromised systems to place their people, like Anya and Brenda. The hospital's greed, had built the tunnel the killers walked through. Arthur Finch was the linchpin. He approved the fake invoices, routed the money, and got a percentage. The Noviks owned him through his gambling debts, but Leo confessed Finch had been getting greedy, skimming off the top. The Noviks were displeased. They were planning to replace him. This was Marco's opening, a crack in the alliance between the bureaucrats and the barbarians. He had Enzo bring Finch to him, not with threats but with an offer. Finch arrived, a sweating, pallid man in a rumpled suit, expecting to be killed. Marco, lying broken in his bed, laid out the new reality. "The Noviks are going to kill you, Arthur. You're a liability. They have your books. They have your offshore accounts. When they have it all, you'll have a stroke in your office. Very sad." Finch stammered denials, but the fear in his eyes was real. "I can make them go away," Marco said. "Permanently, but you have to give me everything. Every invoice, every transfer, every name. The real books, not the ones you show the board, the ones you show the Noviks." It was the ultimate leverage. Marco wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was seizing control of the corruption itself. If he had the financial blueprint, he had the power to expose the Noviks to the feds, to bankrupt their new venture, to turn their own weapon against them. More importantly, he could purge the hospital from the inside out, becoming not just a victim but the surgeon. Finch, seeing a lifeline, agreed. The data began to flow, encrypted files, hidden servers, a labyrinth of deceit that stretched far beyond St. Ignatius. The Noviks, it turned out, were replicating this model in other vulnerable institutions, a nursing home chain, a hospice provider. They were building a syndicate of sanctioned murder and fraud. But as Marco gathered this power, the Noviks reacted. They knew Finch had flipped. They knew Marco was digging. Their response was not to retreat, but to escalate to a terrifying new level. They struck at the heart. Sophia's mother, Marco's sister Carla, was picking up a prescription from the hospital pharmacy. She was escorted by two of Marco's men. It should have been safe. As she waited, a man in janitor's coveralls bumped into her, spilling a bucket of murky water. Apologizing profusely, he helped her clean up with a handful of towels. It was over in seconds. An hour later, back in the family waiting room, Carla complained of a headache, then nausea, then her vision blurred. By the time a doctor was called, she was seizing. She had been exposed to a potent, transdermal nerve agent, likely administered via the contaminated towels. It was an attack designed for maximum psychological impact, not to kill Marco, but to make him watch his family die in the very hospital he was trying to control. Carla was rushed to the ICU. The doctors were baffled, treating it as a possible sudden infection. Only Marco and Enzo knew the truth. It was a message written in poison. "We can touch anyone, anywhere. Your walls are nothing." Sophia, already traumatized, was now catatonic with fear for her mother. Marco's guilt was a physical pain, worse than his broken ribs. His war had drawn a target on his own blood. Enzo wanted to retaliate with overwhelming force, to burn Novik Holdings to the ground. But Marco, for the first time, hesitated. Brute force was what the Noviks expected. It would play into their street war narrative. He needed a smarter weapon. He needed to use the very system they had corrupted to crush them. He ordered Finch to initiate Project Clean Slate. Using the financial data, they began a systematic, secret bleed of the Novik operation. They canceled fraudulent contracts from the hospital's side, cutting off cash flow. They filed anonymous, impeccably detailed tips with the State Medical Board and the IRS, triggering audits on Novik-front businesses. They used the consortium's own back channels to spread distrust, suggesting the Noviks were preparing to sacrifice their local partners to save themselves. It was economic and bureaucratic warfare, fought with keystrokes and paperwork. For every day Marco lay in his bed, the Noviks' new empire developed another leak. But the Noviks had one final, brutal move. They went to the one person they thought could break Marco, his wife, Livia. Livia, who lived separately in a lake house, who had long ago chosen distance from his life. Two Novik men intercepted her on a lonely road, not to harm her, but to deliver a proposition. They gave her a phone with a single number on it. She called Marco, her voice cold with fear and fury. "They say they'll leave me alone. They say they'll even leave Sofia and Carla alone. All you have to do is sign over the downtown trucking contracts. Just walk away from this, Marco. For once in your life, lose, so we can live." It was the masterstroke. They were not asking for his life. They were asking for his legacy, the legitimate core of his empire that he'd built for his family's future. And they were using his love, or what remained of it, as the crowbar. Marco stared at the ceiling, the phone pressed to his ear. He could hear Sofia's quiet crying from the cot. He could hear the ventilator helping his sister breathe down the hall. He had all the financial weapons, all the leverage. But they had found the one vulnerability no fortress could protect, his own heart. He told Livia he would think about it. He hung up. Enzo was watching him, knowing what the offer was. "We can protect them, Marco. We can hide them deeper." "For how long, Enzo? A year, 10. While I fight a war in the shadows." Marco looked old, tired. "They turned my kingdom into a hospital bed and my army into a child's whisper. They have already won the war they wanted to fight." He closed his eyes. The room was silent save for the monitors. He had a choice: surrender the empire he built, or condemn his family to a life of looking over their shoulders, a life he had sworn to spare them from. It was a checkmate painted in poison and blood. But then an idea, dark and perfect, began to form in the depths of his strategic mind. The Noviks had made one critical mistake. They had shown him their entire playbook: corruption, coercion, insider threats. They thought they were offering him a way out. They didn't realize they were handing him the blueprint for their own annihilation. He wouldn't surrender his empire. He would make them swallow it and choke them with it. Marco didn't call his wife back to surrender. He called Arthur Finch. The plan he laid out was not a retreat, but a trap so elaborate it would turn the Noviks' own weapons into their cage. It had 3 parts. First, Finch would go to the Noviks and tell them Marco was broken, that he would sign the contracts, but only under specific, secure conditions. A meeting at a neutral location with lawyers present. This would lure their leadership into the open. Second, using Finch's access, Marco's tech team would initiate a silent, catastrophic data dump. Every fraudulent invoice, every illicit transfer, every incriminating email from the Nova-Clink shell companies would be packaged and encrypted, ready to be sent to a list of recipients with a single click. The list included the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, the Illinois Attorney General, and the Department of Health and Human Services. Third and most critical, Marco would give the Noviks exactly what they wanted: a signed contract, but not the real one. The meeting was set for a conference room at the Omni Hotel, chosen for its multiple exits and lack of affiliation with either family. The Novik boss, a man named Victor, arrived with 3 lawyers and 4 soldiers. He was confident, smelling victory. Marco arrived in a wheelchair, pushed by Enzo, looking every bit the defeated invalid. Sofia was with Livia at a safe house, but her warning had already won the war. The contract was presented. It transferred operational control of Morty Trucking and Waste Management's downtown routes to a Novik holding company. Victor scanned it, nodded to his lawyers who gave curt approvals. Marco took the pen. His hand shook. He signed. The documents were exchanged. Victor smiled, a cold, triumphant thing. "A wise decision. Your family will be left in peace." "Yes," Marco said, his voice weak. "Peace." What Victor didn't know was that the contract he held was a masterpiece of legal sabotage. Buried in the clauses, written in obtuse but airtight legalese, were provisions that made the transfer conditional upon the uninterrupted and lawful operation of the assets. The second part of Marco's plan activated. As Victor left the hotel, feeling like a king, the data dump executed. At 9 a.m. the next morning, federal agents simultaneously raided the Novik headquarters, the medical billing consultancy, and the home of Arthur Finch, who had been prepped to play the cooperating witness. The evidence was overwhelming, digital, and traced every dollar back to Novick accounts. It wasn't just about the hospital fraud. It was about racketeering, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The Novicks were not street thugs to the feds. They were a criminal enterprise with spreadsheets, and now the government had all of them. Victor Novick was arrested before lunch. His empire, built on subtle coercion and bureaucratic murder, collapsed in a single day under the weight of its own paperwork. The conspiracy at St. Ignatius was exposed. Administrators were fired, the board was dissolved, and the hospital was placed under federal monitorship. But Marco was not done. Justice had two sides, the courtroom and the street. The nurses, Anya and Brenda, were in protective custody awaiting trial. Their protection didn't last. Anya was found in her cell, dead from an apparent suicide. The note, written in Polish, simply read, "For my mother." The poison she had meant for Marco was the same type found in her system. Brenda, awaiting transfer, suffered a sudden, severe allergic reaction during a meal. Her epinephrine pen, the one she had carried as a weapon, was inexplicably empty. Poetic clinical justice. As for Carla, Marco's sister, she survived. The nerve agent caused lasting neurological damage, tremors, occasional memory lapses, but she was alive. Marco moved her and Sophia into a guarded estate with round-the-clock private nursing. He would spend the rest of his life making amends to them. His own recovery was slow. The physical wounds healed, but the lesson of the hospital bed was permanent. He had seen his vulnerability, and he had seen the true cost of his world. He began to dismantle the more violent arms of his organization, focusing on the legitimate businesses. The trucking firm, now back under his full control thanks to the voided Novick contract, became his primary focus. It was a quiet retirement by his standards. The final surprise came a year later. The board of the newly reformed St. Ignatius Medical Center, under community pressure to restore trust, needed a figurehead for its oversight committee. Someone whose story embodied both the danger of institutional corruption and the possibility of redemption. They needed someone the public could believe was truly independent, who had faced the monster and survived. They asked Sophia. Marco was furious. He refused. But Sophia, now 8, had grown in the shadow of the trauma. She had a quiet steel to her. She asked to speak to the board members herself. With Marco and a lawyer present, she did. She told them in her clear, small voice about hearing the bad words, about being scared, about wanting to help. She said she wanted to make sure no other kids were ever scared in a hospital again. She said she would do it, but only if she could have her own advisor, someone who knew about keeping promises. She meant Enzo. The board, disarmed and morally shanghaied by a child, agreed. Sophia Morty became the youngest ever community overseer of a major hospital. Her monthly visits, with Enzo a looming presence at her shoulder, became legendary. Administratives stumbled over their words. Budgets were scrutinized with a child's simple question: is this for the patients or for the money? Marco watched this transformation with a mixture of awe and dread. His little shadow had stepped into the light, and she was changing the very world that had tried to kill him. She was his living legacy, not of fear, but of a stubborn, whispered no that had echoed into a revolution. The war was over. The Novick family was in ruins, its leaders facing decades in prison. The hospital was cleansed, at least for now. Marco had traded a piece of his soul for that peace, but he had protected his family. He often sat in his garden, the cold Chicago wind biting at him, and thought about the fragile chain of events. A car accident, a child's ear for her grandmother's tongue, a moment of bravery in a sea of adult blindness. It had brought down an empire and built something stranger in its place. He kept one souvenir from the whole affair. In his study, framed on the wall, was the first piece of official paperwork from St. Ignatius's new era. It was the charter for the Sophia Morty Oversight Committee. Next to it, in a small glass case, was the empty, unlabeled ampule of potassium chloride that Anya had carried. a reminder of how close it had all come to ending, and of the simple, incomprehensible love that had refused to let it. The story of Don Marco Morty and the little girl in the hallway is more than a mafia thriller. It is a map of modern power. It shows us that the most dangerous threats are no longer always in the alley with a gun. They are in the syringe, in the spreadsheet, in the whispered conversation in a language you're not supposed to understand. The Noviks didn't fail because Marco was stronger. They failed because they underestimated the one element their calculus of corruption could never account for: a child's love and her perfect, accidental memory. It forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. In a world where institutions we rely on, hospitals, banks, governments, can be hollowed out by silent, patient forces, where does real safety lie? Is it in stronger locks or in sharper attention? Is it in power or in the simple, human connections that power often overlooks? Sophia's story is the ultimate proof that vulnerability and strength are not opposites. Her vulnerability, her small size, her dependence, is what positioned her to hear the truth. Her strength, her courage to speak, is what changed everything. In that hospital, the boss with his army was powerless. The child in the hallway held all the power. The cleanup at St. Ignatius continues to this day. Reforms are implemented, audits are constant. But those who were there know the real change wasn't a new policy. It was the understanding that someone is watching, and that someone might be the person you least expect. For Marco, the war ended not with a bang, but with a slow, deliberate turning away. He still runs his businesses, but the shadows he operates in are lighter, quieter. His legacy is no longer just an empire of trucks and contracts. It is a niece who sits on a hospital board, a living reminder that the most potent force in the world is sometimes just a whisper of truth in a sea of lies. So the next time you find yourself in a place of supposed safety, a hospital, a bank, a government office, remember the lesson of the hallway. The real power structures are often invisible, built on secrets and silence. But they can be broken, not always by force, but by a witness, by someone who pays attention, by someone who, against all odds, understands. If you found this story of hidden power and unexpected courage compelling, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the real stories that shape our world. We unravel the narratives hidden in plain sight. Thanks for watching.